Hi, how you doing today? Thank you very much for joining us for a great webinar here today between Truebill and Very Good Security. So my name is Don Smith. I'm in sales leadership over here at Very Good Security. And, I always try to get around and talk to our customers after they've implemented. And my conversation with Idris was very, very special to me, and one that I thought, we should broadcast to others to just educate them on the decisions and what goes into the decision of buy versus build. And we have a very successful story here with Truebill, who decided to buy and work with VGS. So agenda here today. So we're going to start with some housekeeping agenda items. But then after that, there's going to be an introduction of myself and obviously Idris. And then from there, we're going to talk about how Truebill and VGS work together. And then finally, after that, it's going to be buy versus build. And then after that, we talk a little bit about security and compliance. And then from there, we do a Q&A. So just some housekeeping things on my end. All participants are in listen-only mode. So the session is going to be recorded. And please submit any question that you may have via chat. Contact us at any time with any more questions at contact@verygoodsecurity.com. Once again, that's contact@verygoodsecurity.com. So we're in the introductions portion. So we have Idris on the line. He's the CTO and co-founder of Truebill. He does a personal financial management application with a mission to meaningfully improve the financial health of millions of people. Before Truebill, he founded a company at webs.com. It was a do-it-yourself website builder, which was acquired by Vistaprint in 2011. And Idris is an active angel investor and is invested in VGS after seeing the value. Moving forward, so this is my introduction. So I'm in sales leadership over at VGS. I was previously at a company called Verkada. I went in an evaluation, and then from there, I was previous to that, I was the first go-to-market hire at Progressly, which actually got acquired by Box. So we're getting into the meat of the presentation here. I know you guys have heard me talk for a while here, but we are going to actually turn it over to Idris for a little bit on how Truebill and VGS works together.
So when we found VGS, I actually didn't get it for a little while. And it's the kind of thing where when you get it, when it clicks, you're like, okay, this is a game changer. I think the best analogy to VGS is basically Stripe. So we use Stripe for payment processing, which I'm sure a lot of other folks do. And the way it works is, you basically, user enters their credit card onto your website or your app, and that credit card gets sent directly to Stripe. It doesn't hit your servers. And then Stripe gives you back a token that's like, okay, this token represents their credit card. And you can never call Stripe and say, give me this credit card number. But you can call Stripe and say, charge this credit card. And so similarly, VGS does that, but for any type of sensitive data, not just credit cards. So it might be a credit card number, it might be a bank account number, whatever it is. It might be even something less sensitive like a birth date. And essentially what happens is the user enters their data in. That data never hits your server. So VGS tokenizes it on its way to your server, and then you get a token. And then when you want to send it out to some partner that needs that data, whether it's a payment processor or something else, some other partner, VGS will take that token and properly convert it so that that partner can use it for what they need to use it for. What I love about this is if you think about the world of Stripe again, the old world was you have to go and find all these payment gateways, and then more importantly, you have to worry about PCI compliance and make sure that when you're storing credit card numbers, you need to store them securely, and there's all these requirements. And frankly, PCI compliance is not even, I think it was written a while ago, and it's not the most secure. It's a good guideline, and a good starting point, but just because you're PCI compliant does not mean hackers can't get these credit card numbers. And so with Stripe, we say, look, Stripe has an entire security team. They spend all day thinking about this. I'm very comfortable giving them that data and me not having it, so that I don't have to worry about that. And likewise with VGS, it's the same thing. It's like, let VGS be the experts on security, and Truebill will worry about building Truebill. And then yeah, the other thing it does is like, we don't have the burden of that data. You know, I think of any sensitive private data of a user as a bit of a burden, right? It should weigh heavily on you. And so we don't have to worry about that. I don't have the weight of that on my shoulders because someone else is taking care of that part, and I can rest assured that like they're spending all day and all night thinking about making sure that's secure. And they can also, they're audited, and I can confirm that on my end as well. And the last piece I'll say here, beyond security, is just the ease. I mean, I think this is why it was so hard for VGS to click for me, I think, is because it was so simple. We code as if we're storing plain text. VGS lives sort of in the HTTP layer. So when data comes in or out of your system, VGS does the encryption or decryption into a token. But for us, we just say, okay, the user gave this credit card number. We're going to store that credit card number in the database, and it's just a fake token. And so if you look at our code, it looks like there's no encryption at all. It looks like we're just doing everything in plain text. It looks like, this was written in 1995 and nobody cared about security. And yet it's, super secure. And to me, that ease also translates to, I think less complexity is more secure. As soon as you introduce more complexity, you introduce more room for human error, and that error can come anywhere. It can, whether it's in the code, whether it's in credentials or keys laying around on developers' machines, whether it's through phishing attacks and things like that. And this sort of wipes out a huge swath of all those concerns. So
thank you very much for that. Yep, thank you very much for that, Idris. So yeah, we're transitioning into, that was how VGS works together with Truebill. Now we're getting into the buy versus build portion of this. So I'm going to turn that back over to you for the buy versus build.
Yeah, so I might be a little biased here. I personally love to buy instead of build. I think just generally, we want to build a great personal finance app. Obviously, we care a ton about security because it's users' personal sensitive data. But like, we're not experts in, security. We're not experts in anything that we're not experts in like hosting servers, for example, and we don't want to be. Like, that's why we use AWS. And so similarly here, this is something where it's just so easy that it's like, let's just buy it, right? It's going to be cheaper anyway in the long run. I think rolling your own security is always a bad idea. There's even, I've seen on plenty of security questionnaires, that's like a standard question, is like, do you do any of your own encryption or any of your own encryption algorithms, things like that. I think it's a bad idea. It leaves room for human errors. Again, in coding, there's layers of like where this data is stored. Is it stored in a database? Did you accidentally log some of this data? Did somebody put it on a USB drive and leave it in the office? It's a huge mess. I think the other thing is that like we were able to standardize on VGS. So anytime we're doing any type of secure data passing, we just use VGS. It's not a question. It's not like, oh, which encryption algorithm do we need because this data is more sensitive, or do we want to do it this way or do we want to do it that way? There's that whole choice is gone. It's just like the answer is always VGS. which just makes everything go smoother and faster, engineering wise. And then, this is the way I confirm kind of a build versus buy decision is, or any architectural decision really, is, looking at it several months later or a year later or even several years later and looking at like, okay, how has this decision held up? And for VGS, this has been really astounding because basically on a monthly basis, we find new use cases for VGS. We're constantly, you know, doing something. We recently integrated with a credit score company to give credit scores to our users, and we found like, oh, the users need to pass them a social security number. And we're like, okay, great, no question, this is going to VGS, and this just keeps on happening. And what's really nice is a lot of times it's not standard. A lot of times that partner we're integrating with is like, okay, we need this data, and we need it encrypted in this weird obscure encryption algorithm before you send it to us. And we've literally just, we've gone to VGS and they're like, oh yeah, we can do that. We just, add these 3 lines and it's done. And that's 3 lines in VGS configuration, not in our code, which is great. And then lastly, I've noticed that we are more likely to protect data. So there's always a spectrum of how sensitive data is. And we're more likely to protect something because it's so easy now. Where we're like, oh, birth date, I mean, that's kind of sensitive. It's not a social security number, but it's certainly sensitive and we probably don't need to store it. So let's just use VGS. Like the question is really like, why not use VGS? Like, do we have a good reason to store it ourselves or not? Becomes the question. And I think, again, that's driven by the ease and by having a solution in place already.
Yeah, I appreciate all that color. Idris, I have a question for you. I mean, what if you're, there's probably some people on the line or people out there that were like, hey, we're a small shop, right? I have all, I'm the only person who has access or be building on our system, and I have the expertise to do this. What would you say to that person in a build versus buy scenario? What would be some of the things that you would maybe forewarn them about or think about in that scenario?
Well, first I'd say you don't have the expertise to do it. Um, it's it's highly unlikely that you're, unless you're like a trained, cybersecurity expert. In which case, yeah, if you're building a cybersecurity company, sure, go ahead and do it yourself. You probably know what you're doing. If you're not, then you probably don't know what you're doing. And actually, I think that's one of the most dangerous things is thinking that something is secure and it's not actually secure, right? And so we actually rolled our own for a short time before we used VGS on some applications, and it was better than nothing. It was better than storing things in plain text. But there are definitely gaps, and there were flaws that we knew about that we were like, okay, this is an acceptable risk for us at this point in the company. But there were also gaps that we didn't know about, and that worsen over time. And so, again, I think with something like security, you really want to hand it off. It's the same reason that audits and external auditors are such a big concept in security, because you want people outside of your company looking in and fixing things, because you're blind to what you don't know, basically.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then my next question to you would be, you said that you were able to implement this and it was, faster, right? So speed is something that we hear all the time, right? People come to us, right? And they're like, hey, I have to get this up. Or like you said, hey, we're changing our business and that means we have to pass sensitive data to a third party, and we need to do that now, right? So what did speed mean for you guys? The fact that you guys were able to say, we're not going to build this, we're going to buy and outsource this to VGS. That speed of implementation, what did that mean for you guys as a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially as a smaller company, we just don't have the bandwidth to dedicate 1 or 2 engineers to, you know, to security or to encryption or things like that. And I think you know, there's the benefits you can see up front and the benefits you can't see up front. So the benefits you can see up front is, yeah, you're not wasting engineering resources on, you know, on these types of problems. Um, what you don't see up front is just that, like, it takes out a whole, like, category of problems in your engineering org, and so you're more willing to go for those. You're more willing to go for things that you might have hesitated on before, because you're like, oh yeah, we know how to do this. We've done it 20 times before. Like, this is just another one of those.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Okay, we're going to move on to the next slide here. So security first. So this is, I love this slide. So I'm going to actually just pass this back over to you and talk about how, when you think about security first, what does that mean to you? And then I'll hop in with questions as we go.
Sure. So yeah. So as I mentioned, I mean, we're a personal finance company. Obviously, first and foremost, our users are concerned about their security and privacy, and rightfully so. I think, you know, when we were smaller, we didn't have a security team, and I think that's really important to your previous question of having a small team. Is like, VGS just lifts that burden, so, you know, it's very easy to be secure by default, and you don't need this giant security team that has to worry about that. And then also, once we do have a security team, like, now our security team doesn't have to worry about, like, sensitive data on our servers, you know, getting hacked and things like that. It's one area where the security team can say, okay, I know how VGS works. I know what this looks like. Now let's focus on other stuff within our infrastructure, rather than having, again, like, a full-time person just dedicated to your encryption algorithms, or you know, how you store things securely. And actually, I think data tracing is another big piece of that here, which I'll get to later. Yeah, I think, you know, I said this before, most companies are not security companies, and don't want to worry about security all day, even though we have to. And it's trust. I think, you know, I think you want to, the big part of security, we just went through a SOC 2 process, and so, you know, I think one big part of security is, like, what do you trust and what do you not trust, right? And what are you trusting to do what? And so we kind of trust but verify with VGS, just as we trust but verify with Stripe, right? We know that, like, if our database gets dumped, there will be no sensitive data in there, right? And that's great. We also, you know, just philosophically, like, we don't want to store data that we don't need to store, right? Like, if again, I think of data as a liability. So, like, if we're storing something like a social security number, that's liability. Like, a hacker can download our database, and they then have, you know, all these social security numbers. Right now, if a hacker downloads our database, they just get a bunch of junk, you know, tokens that it's like token underscore and then a bunch of random characters. It means nothing to them. You can't do a dictionary attack on it. You can't do any type of attack on it. It's useless to them, unless they somehow get into VGS, right? So it's like they'd have to hack two systems, right, simultaneously. And then this is the part I love here, is that not only do we not store the sensitive data, we don't see it. And this is where it gets into data tracing. It's like, when you try to trace data and understand, like, okay, where does this data show up? Okay, well, it comes in on a HTTP request. It then gets logged out into a log somewhere, and then it gets stored in our database. And then if there's an error, that error gets thrown up, and our error reporting software now has a copy of that data, right? And oh, and an engineer accidentally sent it to an analytics platform, so now that's on the analytics platform. And so you end up, like, once data hits your system, like, it can go in any number of places, and then, you know, it's going to go in your data warehouse as well. And it's like, it's a huge mess trying to track down where all that goes, and then trying to prevent that. Again, it's prone to human error, right? You can tell engineers, don't log this, but someone makes a mistake. You know, they're humans. People make mistakes. With VGS, because we don't even see it, our server never actually sees it. Even if we log it, again, you're logging a useless token that means nothing. And so you can very much rest assured and not have to worry about like all these procedures around like, oh, to make sure you're not doing this, make sure you're redacting here, make sure you're doing that. It just becomes way easier and way more secure.
Great. I had a question. So
Yeah.
you're working along, and it's along the vein of you don't store this and you don't even see it. I think what was powerful is when I spoke to you about some of your third-party processes and like there's things that they need in order for you guys to do business together, and how you guys were able to work with them without storing it or seeing it, but yet the third party still gets all the information that they need. So I'd like for you to jump into a little bit of that, if you could.
Yeah, so again, you just kind of set at the boundary of our service. So when before anything hits our infrastructure, it's sort of intercepted by VGS and redacted. Any sensitive data is redacted and becomes tokens on our server. And when we then kind of create routes to go out to third parties, and if we send any redacted data there, we can send it out through VGS and tell VGS, okay, reveal this token so that the partner can see it. And so again, we don't see anything at all, but and we act as if we're just to the code, we're just kind of sending things back and forth in plain text. But the partner gets what they need, and I think one great thing here is the partners don't actually know about VGS. Whether we're using VGS or not, the partners don't know and don't really care. They're getting, their API is getting what it needs, and it just works. And there's no weird like, oh, well, we use VGS, so you should, can you please work with VGS and see if you can do an integration there? Like that's obviously a no for most partners, but they don't need to. It's just you just plug it in and it's transparent to them.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, moving forward to the next slide.
Yep.
Compliance descope. So, yeah, I'll hand it back over to you just for compliance descope.
Yeah. So, I think here, compliance is a funny thing because, as I said, we just went through a SOC 2 process, and there's a lot of sort of box checking in compliance, and there's a lot of, for me, I care much more about the actual security than the compliance. I think of compliance as like the bare minimum, and so things like PCI, for example, you don't want to be just compliant with PCI. You want to be way more secure than the PCI requirements. And so, I think, again, if you look at Stripe, credit cards never touch your servers, and then you don't have to do a full PCI compliance. You basically, Stripe is PCI compliant, and you say, all right, we're using Stripe, and you get almost like a waiver, right? And so similarly you could do the same thing with VGS on credit cards. And similarly with like SOC 2 compliance, there are questions about, like I said, do you roll your own security algorithms? Where do you store this sensitive data, et cetera? And you sort of can take that out of the scope of your SOC 2, where you're saying, no, this stuff, like, we don't deal with any of this. This is all handled by VGS. And VGS has their own audits and all of that, and we can point you there. This also happens not just with compliance, but with third parties, right? So any third party you work with, like I said, we work with a credit score company where users are providing their social security number. When looking at that security questionnaire, all the questions around like, well, how are you going to protect this user's data and all of that, which are great questions. It's very easy to answer that. It's like, we don't see it. It's not on our servers. So when they ask like, is it stored encrypted? Are you safeguarding it? Blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just very easy to check those boxes. Yes, yes, yes.
That's great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Moving forward, questions. Yeah, so I think the question there, he just was like, how long have you been using VGS?
A year and a half, maybe.
Got it. Got it. A year and a half. And given over that time, right? I know that you said that you've seen a lot of different sensitive data over the time, and you find new use cases. I guess when you think about the growth trajectory, just like of new use cases, is there anything else that as you grow, that you think that? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, you've seen the benefits of the immediate benefits of outsourcing this. I guess as your company grows, right, are there any growth opportunities with VGS, or is there any growth opportunities that people should be thinking about as, or as a long-term viability solution outside of security?
I said it before, but like we constantly find new uses for VGS. I mean, it's literally like every month. It's it's kind of surprising. And what's great about that is one that like when we come across something like that, something where we need to handle sensitive data, it's very quick, right? It's like I said, it's a quick decision. Um, but also just that like it's going to stay secure and VGS is going to keep up with best practices. And so, you don't if you're rolling your own security or building something out yourself, you're going to have to maintain that thing, whatever it is, right? If you're using some encryption algorithm, like at some point you're going to want to upgrade, maybe you used SHA, 128 and you want to go to 256, right? Maybe you want to start using AWS KMS as your key management system, or you want to switch to Google Cloud or something like that. Um, there is there are these like hidden maintenance costs that linger around that you might not think about at the beginning, but 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in, your security team is like, hey, what's this? This is not secure. We need to update this. And so I'm certain that there are times where that has already saved us and will continue to save us, where we're not dealing with the maintenance of this whole like security encryption system.
Got it. And then was there another question? Any other questions out there, Anna?
So it says, Idris, you said you had encryption before VGS. What made you switch that? Was there a turning point that made you say that you want to change?
Yeah, it was basically the two themes we talked about here. One is security. That was not a foolproof system. We were basically using like PGP encryption, but part of that means that you've got some PGP keys somewhere that if someone gets access to, they can decrypt data, right? So security was a big piece of it, and the other piece was just, again, ease. Like that was a really complex part of our system where we were doing this manual encryption and then having to decrypt it. We had basically support agents who could decrypt this data and things like that, and it was just much less secure. And we also get benefits from VGS, like automatic auditing and things like that, where we can see like when stuff is accessed that we would have otherwise had to build ourselves.
Thank you for that, Idris. I appreciate that. And any other questions out there?
We had this is the same follow-up from the second question. So it's saying, so since you're using, or right now you're using VGS for PII storage, are there any other use cases that you're planning to use moving forward?
Let's see, like non-PII use cases.
Or maybe different products that help store PII.
Sorry, say that again.
Or maybe other parts of the product that might help you pull in sensitive data from other places.
Yeah, I mean, I guess sensitive data is very often PII. So it's hard to think of that. One area where we've thought about using VGS and might do at some point is for secrets management. So rather than like storing our secrets somewhere in our own systems, essentially not storing those at all and having those as VGS tokens instead. And so, you could use that to really secure your APIs so that, again, if somebody gets access to your secrets or they have access to your servers and then can print out your secrets, they're then getting VGS tokens, which are, useless basically to them. So I think that's an interesting place that actually I think VGS brought up with me a while ago. And I think that, I think that type of thing will continue to grow with VGS. I think VGS will find new ways to integrate in new places where this is really valuable. I think the end goal here is really like, we shouldn't be dealing with anything sensitive, whether it's user data, whether it's secrets, any of that. Like, get it out of my system. And like I said, if you think about it from an attacker's perspective, imagine an attacker has SSH access to your server, they're logged into your server, and they have access to your database. And then think about, what do they get, right? Like, what's the news article basically that shows up after that? And so you want to limit their access as much as possible, and getting it off your system is a great way to do that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then any other questions?
No, that's it.
Okay, great. Well, Idris, thank you so much for being an incredible guest and allowing us to hear more about your journey as a company. And I think from there, I think that's it. I think we're gonna hop off.